thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah, that'll work, yeah.
Yeah. First up, training to failure. Okay. All right. Go, your reasoning.
So obviously there's a lot of nuance here, and if you had said squat, training to failure, I would be on the same page. I think most people should go through at least finding out where that line is. And if it's a safe movement, if it's possible to train to failure, I think training to failure makes a lot of sense. You don't always have to do it. It's not a yes or a no, but I think at least occasionally testing that is a good idea. And if a movement is not safe to train to failure, it might not be that great of a movement for hypertrophy in some cases. So,
yeah. I'm saying no because of yes, you should definitely know what failure feels like, but in terms of you needing to do it, I think people have like this all or none type of mentality. So they're either gonna train right to like in this failure, then what happens with that after is basically like injury. And again, it comes to like, do they know to not train to failure when you're doing back squats? You know what I mean? Like there's certain things. So for me, it's like, is it necessary to train to failure? No. Should you train to failure? Once in a while. So if it was like a thing where you necessarily need it all the time, I would have said this if you need it. But I'm just saying that because, again, like, getting close to there is good enough. But, the person should, be able to keep intensity high enough that they can at least get close to failure, right?
Yeah.
So
if the choice is between 0 reps in reserve, so you get a grindy rep and you really get through and then you succeed. So you didn't fail. You just got a really slow rep. You couldn't have done another one, but you didn't fail. To me, I would say 0 reps in reserve on average is going to be better than failure.
Yeah.
Because you don't need to fail. There's nothing magical about what happens when you fail, right? Like, let's say you're going for a rep and you don't quite get it and you fail, versus a rep where you barely get it and you squeeze it out.
Yeah.
I would say the success is going to be better for muscle growth because you're getting that slow rep, that grindy rep. So there's nothing really magical about failure. But if you ask me, 10 reps in reserve versus failure, I would say just go to failure. Because you're so far away from where you need to be.
Yeah.
And, what if it's 5 reps in reserve versus failure? I would probably still say failure. Now you get into like 2 versus 1 versus 0. That's where it's like, it depends on the movement, it depends on the context, it depends on the individual. Is it lengthened focused or contraction focused, injury history? And so you got to be close. I think we can agree on that. You don't have to fail, but you should know where it is.
I should have said like 0 RAR or failure. Then it would have gone with like 0 RAR. Okay, sumo deadlifts.
Yeah. I actually have been doing them recently, and I have a bit of like a hip lower back imbalance, and so they're actually nice because you are pushing out to the side as well, and so it's nice to activate a little bit more abductors and a little bit more adductors as well. Easier on the lower back as well, easier to recover from. I know Lane Norton says that he pulls sumo not because he can lift more weight as a powerlifter, but because it's so much easier to recover from compared to a hard conventional pull. And so I find the same thing. It's still decent for erectors. It's still decent for glutes. It's still, I don't know if I would necessarily always recommend it as a hypertrophy option, but certainly it's on the table. Certainly it's a good movement. And it does look cooler pulling it conventional, but I think looking cool is not the most important thing for most people.
Yeah, I like pulling sumo. I've never been a low rep deadlifter, conventional or sumo, so I've always been a 10 plus guy. So it's always been a hypertrophy-esque exercise. So for me, when it comes to like just overall development, for legs and whatnot, the adductor activation and the glutes and everything else, and you kind of get the best of the conventional and you get a little more leg development. So for me, like I like sumo, and then easier on the back for me as well too. So I don't do them anymore because get hip surgery. But either way, it's my reasons for that.
They've gotten a lot of hate in the past couple of years. I think if it's still a hard lift, I mean, when
Yes.
people are like, sumo is easy. Are you kidding me? Have you even done a sumo deadlift? Like actually, like a hard set of 10, 12, 15 on sumo deadlifts, that's a rough time. I mean, so when people are saying it's easy or even easier, it's still a deadlift from the floor. It's still one of the toughest things. I mean, if you're actually pushing a set of reps on deadlifts, I mean, that's rough. It's rough.
Yeah. Full range of motion. I'll say this. Full range of motion. Yeah, like full. Like I'm talking like from the entire contraction, the shortened, the lengthened, the eccentric, concentric.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this is the way to go most of the time. I actually did a recent experiment where I did only lengthened partials. So I was doing only the stretched. So I was doing like one arm pull downs down to like here or so.
Yeah.
And I was doing my bench presses in that bottom position and my presses sort of like this. I'll probably keep it on some movements. I could see some movements where it would make sense, but on other ones, again, I feel like the harder you contract, the more you can stretch, and it just feels better. I feel like you're training more of, I mean, it sounds obvious, but you're training more of the range of motion.
Yeah.
Whereas with lengthened partials, you're getting strong, potentially stronger at part of the range of motion, but then you try to go down and you're just not strong at that position that you've been ignoring. So I like to train with a pretty good range of motion. In most cases, I mean, if someone wants to squat around parallel, I think that's enough range of motion to get pretty much anything you want out of the squat. You don't have to necessarily sink it down super low. Same thing with an RDL. You don't necessarily need to be standing on 3 boxes in order to try to get down super low to get a lot out of the movement. Maybe you can. It can be in variation. But I would say, for most people, full range of motion is still a really good default, and you can maybe experiment with lengthened partials on some movements a little bit later in your training career.
Yeah, I totally agree. I find that when it comes to just tension in general, if we're trying to create the most amount of tension, I find that, if we can, let's go for instance, taking the roll all the way down, and then I like, saying catch a contraction, then riding it from its peak contraction, you're innately creating a lot more tension to the lengthened contraction at the top, right? So for me, it's like, number one, that. Two, I find that people learn to feel their muscle more, or to be able to activate more when they go through the floor. I find that, the shortened contraction is where most people feel the chest or feel their back, or, when they're here. Like, you can feel it stretching here, but like, it's when you're pulling it in and then being down here where you can feel your lats actually, right? So for me, it's a contraction thing where I want to feel the entire movement and have more control. So it's that's why I'm a full range of motion guy. But then also it's like, add the partials. Then once you can't do the full range of motion, that's when I'm going to add my partials. I can't do the full range anymore. Cool. Then I get to do the partials.
Yeah, and there was a study on that recently on calves, where they had one group do the full range of motion, and then another group just kept going with partials, getting less and less and less range of motion, and the group that went past failure actually got significantly more growth. And so, I think that kind of gets you the best of both worlds, where you're getting that full range of motion, you're training the entire range of motion, but then as you can't quite get that full contraction, you're still going. And so, I think that's the way to go. But I do think it is important to do something with that full range of motion, because as you said, it does help you. You contract the lat, and then you're sort of still contracting and feeling it as you go up. And then you contract, and you're almost building a little bit more momentum with the muscle as you're going up into that top position. Whereas if you just stay in that top position, it almost feels like you're just sort of bending your arm. Right? Because it's hard to pull with the lat when it's just always stretched.
Very hard to.
For most people. There might be some people who can finesse that. But for me, I found like contracting, then stretch, contract, stretch. Whereas if you're just stretching, that maybe with a little bit more practice, but I did it for a whole month. So maybe.
And that's where true failure actually comes from, is once you can't do the full range, once like the partial, after partial, if you can't even do a partial, that is your actual true failure, right? I'm pretty sure you posted. You posted that? You posted something on. I'm pretty sure it was you, and I commented about that.
It might have been, yeah.
And it got me down a rabbit hole. I'm like, thank you, because I'm like, oh, let me see this. I'm like, this is interesting. I'm like, ah, and I just kept going down. I'm like, this is I've always been thinking. That's what failure is. When you can't do the partial, after you can't do the full range of motion, when there's nothing left, you can't even do this. Because if there's still stuff in the tank, then there's your failure. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, because usually because the science-based definition of failure was technical failure for a while.
Right.
Where, oh, you can't complete the full range of motion, that's failure.
Yeah.
And that is good for science because you can measure it fairly well, fairly accurately and precisely. Yeah. But the muscle has only failed in this little task, like that last little inch of the range of motion. Whereas you have this, and you have this, and you have this, and you have this, and you have. I mean, you might have 10 or 15 more partials, increasingly shorter partials, if you really want to tax the muscle. And it's possible that this is why so many people have to do so many sets for back, because typically back is where you do your rows and you hit your technical failure, and you only really failed in that last little part of the cable row near your chest. Yeah. And you go, well, I'm done. And it's like, well, your lats aren't really done. Your back is not really done. Like, it could do a lot more. And so, I mean, I've been doing this for a few years now, where if I'm doing like a chest supported row, probably don't do this on bent over rows, you know, barbell bent over row if anyone's listening to this, because your posture is usually what tends to go. But if you have a nice chest supported row or a T-bar row, I mean, occasionally try taking a set to like the point where you can't even move. Like you can't even really start the movement. Like you can't even start the, I mean, it's awful. Like, this is not easy, okay? This is, if you're doing it right, this is probably the most miserable part of your week, right? I don't recommend this on squats. I don't recommend this on deadlifts. Anything that's, you know, spinal loading, it's probably not a great option here. But a nice chest supported row, just go to the point where you can't move at all. And you will not need nearly as much volume, I promise you. I used to do tons and tons of back work, and I do less volume now because I'm just getting more out of every set.
All right, let me see. Powerlifting for bodybuilding, like the whole power bodybuilding type thing. It's for me. It's like no. It's like none of it is like any of the lifts. The big three lifts. I would say, except for maybe, but even that, like, they're unnecessary for muscle hypertrophy. When it comes to just like you want to make your body look better, you don't need a deadlift. You don't need to like flat bench is like the, you know, incline, right? And then squatting is like, you don't squat, get an attack squat or a leg press or some lunging or whatever. So that's why bodybuilding for me is like, nah, power bodybuilding, nah. I've done it before, but like also reason why like I'm getting surgery, that and steroid abuse. So yeah.
So I think they're good movements, but they're overrated and they're overdone. And so when I say they're good movements and I say they're overrated, sometimes people can't like wrap their head around that. Something can be good, but still overrated. I think they're fine movements, but people put them on a pedestal. I think to a point where they're just, I mean, plus with a barbell bench, you're locked onto a bar, so you can't really move the way you want to move. If you're bench pressing alone at home, make sure you're in a power rack, because especially if you get strong, well, shit happens, and that's, I think, I read a study where it's about 10 people sadly die every year from barbell bench pressing alone at home. Yeah, which is a bad way to go.
Yikes.
Yeah, and it was probably more in 2020. It was an older study. It's probably more in 2020 because a lot of people are training at home. That's not, I mean, I don't want to fearmonger, but, you know, just if you're at home alone, make sure you're using a power rack with the safeties. If you just have a bench without safeties, I don't even know how they make those anymore. Like, that should not be a thing. We should probably scrap those. That's not a good idea. Oh, let's just have them move hundreds of pounds of iron above their face, and if they fail, well, someone will probably rescue them, right? They'll be fine. I mean, I've seen bench press powerlifting meets where someone just dropped the weight from full extension. And they had, you know, just crushed all their. And so again, I don't want to fearmonger. But it's not a requirement by any means if you're just interested in hypertrophy. Machines are fine. Dumbbells, you can just drop them to the side. Even rings are decent. Some body weighted movements. Cables are good. And then the barbell back squat is also good, but as you mentioned, hack squats are awesome, machine squats. I mean, when I got injured, I injured my QL and I couldn't barbell back squat or barbell deadlift. I actually had a really good year of quad gains because it got me away from those movements, and I started doing machine squats, I started doing Smith machine, hack squats, I started doing just other lifts that I would never have done, but I had to, and turns out they were actually really good for a hypertrophy. And so I think most people who get away from the big three, they tend to grow quite well without them. And I've talked to a lot of people who used to be all about them, and then they got away from them, and very few people regret that. I mean, I love to deadlift. I love deadlifting. It's one of my favorite lifts. That's the only lift where I would keep it in just for enjoyment. But barbell squats, barbell bench presses, I think they're completely disposable if you're not a power lifter.
Lifting gear, straps, belts, shoes, sleeves.
Ooh. I'm going to say down with one exception.
All right.
Couple exceptions.
Good. Yeah.
Okay. So straps would be a plus for me, just because, primarily for RDLs, because it's just, I don't think it's worth using a mixed grip on RDLs. It's just, you get the windmilling effect, and it's, the risk of a biceps tear is small, but it's not non-existent, so it's like, why put yourself through that? And so I didn't get straps until like 7 or 8 years of lifting, so I should have gotten them earlier, and that was a good investment. Shoes, like Olympic weightlifting shoes, or just weightlifting shoes, those are good as well. Again, I didn't get those until about 7 or 8 years. I was just elevating my heels on the thin plates. That was okay, but once I got weightlifting shoes, game over. Like, that's just the way to go, I think. It's more stable. You don't have to worry about stepping back onto plates or anything. You can just, I mean, they feel really good, and I really like them. And so those are a plus. Pretty much anything else I don't really use very much. I think a belt is okay, but I tend to train without one just because it feels better for me. Like knee sleeves, wrist wraps, all these other things. Again, I haven't really used, so I can't knock them because I haven't used them, but I also kind of like having not much stuff in my gym bag and being a little bit more minimalistic in that regard. So straps, necessity for me. I think that's something everyone should have and learn, know how to use. And then shoes, weightlifting shoes, that's a really good investment as well. But beyond that for me, but I'm interested to hear your opinion.
Yeah, mine's purely just on it eliminating the limiting factor for your lifting. And I've used all of them. Like, when I'd have something wrong with my elbow, maybe should probably take days off with her. But like elbow issues, I don't have an ACL, so that it helped me, helped me in that regard. As long as we're using them for that purpose to help with, so things aren't limiting. Like your knees are a limiting factor, your elbows are a limiting factor, your wrist is a limiting factor. But I can see where people will just show up with everything on, and then they're stretching. You know what I mean? Like it's like for like I'm always gonna say yes to all those things, because again, like there's also the opposite. People like, don't use straps. You're a pussy if you use straps. And it's like, well then good luck trying to get the most out of your lats when you can't hold on anymore, right? So that's my only reason why. Yeah, right. So just for the sheer fact of like, I don't want to lose reps because of I want to exhaust the muscle, and I don't want my grip, my elbow, my knees, my my ankle flexion being the reason why I can't get the most out of the training. So simple.
I mean, I at a certain point, I was definitely the guy who was like, all these people using straps. But I think it was mostly because I just didn't have straps. And I was like, look at me, I'm not using straps. But like, if I had straps, I would have used them. But like, it's almost like a coping mechanism. It's like, look at me, I'm cool. I'm lifting my 80-pound dumbbell row without a strap. Okay, it's like, okay. But if you could do more with the strap, and you can feel the movement better in where you want to feel it with the strap, then I think it makes sense. Like they're just tools, and as long as you're not relying on them excessively, then I think it's okay. Like when I see a pure beginner show up looking like a mummy where they're just wrapped in everything, that's where I'm like, oh, come on, like you don't need any. Like, I think sometimes it's because people are getting into fitness, and this is usually the middle-aged guys who maybe are doing well financially.
Yeah.
They want to feel like they have that investment, and so they spend a lot of money on like, okay, I got wrap here and I wrap here and I wrap here, and so like they've wrapped everything, and then they're just like, and they have the fanny pack and they have everything with the Cliff Bars and the gloves, and so like they're ready to lift, like in terms of their accessories, they look fabulous, but they're not, like they haven't really done this, and so they're focusing on the wrong thing. I think it's because they have money and they want to transform that money into fitness, but they don't realize that's not really how it works. Like they're better off spending that on knowledge and gaining information rather than like, these guys also use a ton of supplements in a lot of cases. They're taking like 18 different supplements and they have all the accessories and everything. So they just want to feel like they've done something and they've taken action. They don't realize like the action they've taken actually doesn't really help all that much.